Lucien. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and the air shimmered with a violet haze. Gia's hands moved fast, forming a final seal in the air, the sigils glowing like stars for a breath before snapping open the space between. Lucien felt the pull before he saw it, the shimmer twisting into a maw, black-lined and humming with unnatural pressure. He reached forward to stop her, but her foot was already over the threshold. Gia, no! She turned only for a blink, the silver streak in her braid catching the gateway's light. It has to be now, Lucien. We'll stabilize it from the other side. But there was no other side. With a whip of soundless force, the gate collapsed inward, and Gia was gone. The clearing fell still. The chalk symbols burned out at his feet. Lucien stared at the place she'd vanished, the scent of scorched cedar clinging to the air. He knelt, one hand resting over the last mark she'd made. The Crimson Pentacle arrived less than an hour later, red cloaks fluttering like bloodied banners. They questioned, measured, sealed off the grove. An unlicensed portal meant offense. An unsanctioned summoning by elves? Worse. Lucien stood silent while they rifled through his and Gia's things. He spoke only when addressed, but each word was iron. You are not registered, nor is she, the commander said, his helm shaped like a lion's head. Magic of this scale cannot go unchecked. She is gone. That is punishment enough. The knight stared at him, gaze unreadable. Then he tossed a writ into the mud at Lucien's feet. Present yourself to the Steel City within 5 days. Apply properly, or face penance. Lucien picked up the paper without looking at it. 3 days later, the forests gave way to ash-stone roads. The towers of the Steel City rose like frozen lightning from the hills, every spire ribbed with copper veins that glinted in the dusk. He wore his family's blade on his back, but the heavier weight was the silver band Gia had left on his wrist, a shared charm, enchanted to never warm unless the pair stood within arm's reach. It had gone cold. He crossed the threshold of the Magister's hall with dust in his cloak and fire behind his teeth. He would learn the laws. He would master their sigils. And then he would break open the world if he had to. For Gia, Steel City stirred with its usual clamor, bootsteps on wet stone, hammers ringing. Against metal, distant voices layered like thread in a loom. But Lucien moved quietly, his stride too soft for cobblestone, his cloak drawn close. It was not fear that made him cautious. It was pattern, intention. He had grown up with silence, the hush of pine needles underfoot, the gentle rhythm of a loom's shuttle beside the evening fire. His mother, Marith, had taught him to measure before he cut. His father, when present, had spoken in signs more than words, and every sign held meaning. Order, Lucien believed, preceded power. Steel City disagreed. The evocation tower burned brightest at night, its highest spire flaring with light when a student pushed too far. Lucien had done so once only. He'd overreached, his focus cracked, and fire had rippled up the walls like a living thing. The spire masters had called it a promising risk. Lucien had called it failure. This night he didn't ascend the tower. He turned instead toward the central library, its domed roof gleaming with mist in the moonlight. The city had grown outward from this spot, 8 wizard towers spaced in a perfect ring around it, their distances measured in paces, not estimation. It was the city's one honest symmetry. Everything else bent for convenience. He passed under a carved arch, dwarven stone, smooth but unadorned. The dwarves kept their own quarter of the city, tucked beneath the southern wards. Lucien had seen it only once, led by a girl with soot-black fingertips and a smirk too wide for her face. He liked her well enough, but dwarven quarters were too loud, too thick with memory and metal. Here in the library, the only voices were bound in vellum. The fifth level held a restricted wing, anathema, and origin. Lucien had earned just enough trust and just enough quiet obedience to receive access. His fingers brushed the spines, not searching, listening. Then he found it, ward forms and convergent fire, harnessing chaos through sequential intent. The cover pulsed faintly as he opened it, symbols fading and reforming as if waiting for someone to see them correctly. You always return to fire. Lucien didn't startle. The voice belonged to Magister Tournley, the archivist whose wrinkled eyes never left the stacks, but whose awareness circled the tower like a hawk. "I return to what disobeys," Lucien replied, eyes still on the page. Tournley leaned on his staff. "Or perhaps what resembles you." Lucien closed the book. "Evocation is not a roar," he said softly. "It is a breath, guided. So speak the ones who fear to shout." Lucien didn't argue. Debate was noise. He tucked the book into his sleeve satchel, bowed, and moved to the reading chamber. Hours passed in silence, not isolation. Lucien didn't feel alone, but structured quiet. Diagrams sketched themselves in his mind. Glyphs, formulas, overlays of ward and wound. At the edge of one page, someone had written a phrase in red ink. "When the form fails, the name remains." He stared at it for a long time. Gia. Not a name he'd spoken in weeks. Not since the vision. Not since the dreams. But the fire hadn't forgotten her. Neither had the wards. He traced the glyph again. He would bind flame and shield, control and storm. Not to destroy, to reach. And to reach, he would have to burn. Precisely. When the library bells rang second shift, Lucien closed the tome and whispered a word into his sleeve. A pale ring of light flickered around his wrist, a containment spell, and then dimmed to a thread. He stepped out into the night, toward the spire, toward study, toward power, toward her. The morning bell rang, dull and leaden, as Lucien swept the tower's lower hall. Ash clung to the air, not from failed spells, but from torches snuffed too often without care. He swept slowly, methodically, never lifting his eyes. "Faster," came the voice of Advisor Redfield, his assigned mentor, "unless you've decided to study dust evocation." Lucien offered no reply. Redfield had once served as a conservator in the Grand Library. He preserved spell books, tested ward integrity, restored flame-damaged scrolls. Now, his patience had withered. He prowled the evocation tower, assigning chores and discarding apprentices like kindling. Lucien, for his part, was tolerated only because he was quiet, obedient, and forgettable. Third-floor lecture hall needs the benches realigned. "And bring more chalk." Lucien nodded. He moved without protest. Order first. Later, he ate alone in the corner of the tower's refectory. A heel of bread, stewed lentils, a root vegetable he didn't name. His hands trembled faintly, not from nerves, but from hunger. His last real meal had been 2 days prior. He rationed what little coin he earned. Most of it went toward parchment, replacement quills, and the occasional pinch of Major's salt. He could not afford failure. He could not afford much of anything. Across the hall, 3 other apprentices joked about combustion accidents and misfired cantrips. Lucien didn't look at them. They didn't look at him. By candlelight that night, he returned to the practice vault, a hollowed chamber lined with clay wards and soot-resistant panels. Here, he worked until the oil in his lamp ran dry. He had no gift for shortcuts. Every spell took effort, repetition, correction. His hands bore burns where fire had misaligned. His voice cracked from reciting unstable glyphs aloud. He wasn't blessed with refined control, but he had something rarer, endurance. Because, unlike the others, Lucien knew what it cost to cast. Spellwork in Steel City consumed more than time. It burned the body itself, calories transformed into heat, light, force. Magic devoured energy with savage hunger. Lucien felt it in his ribs, his wrists, the way his belt no longer cinched properly. Most mages were thin, not by vanity, but necessity. Power left them hollow, and food filled them back in. Briefly, Lucien often went without. It meant longer rest times between castings, slower progress, more vulnerability in trial. Still, he persisted. He scribed a simple flame ward that night, one he'd studied for weeks. The sigil curved unevenly. His hands ached, but he completed the form, pressed 2 fingers to the rune, and whispered. In chendos, the glyph flared, briefly, then held. A protective ring of embers shimmered around his arm. It flickered, guttering at the edges but did not break. Lucien exhaled. Progress. Later, in the apprentice dormitory, he lay on a too-narrow cot with only a single wool blanket to cut the draught. He held a strip of bark in one hand, the words he'd burned into it earlier still glowing faintly. A spark, held still, is still a fire. His stomach growled. His bones ached, but his eyes didn't close. He whispered to the dark, "She's waiting," and the ember at his wrist pulsed once in reply. Steel City rose around him like a forest of quarried stone, towers cast there, long shadows across slate rooftops and cobbled streets. Smoke from smithies curled in the air, beside steam from bread ovens, mixing into a scent that was equal parts hunger and heat. Lucien kept his head down, his cloak up. His satchel was thin, his coin pouch thinner. He had come to the city's mid-circuit market, where hawkers and hedge wizards traded alongside bakers, scriveners, and dwarven toolwrights. He disliked crowds, but necessity overruled discomfort. He needed supplies, simple things, dried pulses, hard cheese, binding twine, 2 sheets of spell paper, ink if he could afford it, and salted fruit if he dared a luxury. The streets were louder than the tower. Boots on wet stone, sputtering braziers, a dwarven merchant, shouting prices in slang and sharespeak. Lucien passed a bookstall but didn't stop. Second-hand spellbooks were rarely reliable. He glanced at one. A green binding burned at the edges. Too risky. Too expensive. At the corner of an alley between a herbmonger's stall and a meat cart, Lucien paused. A narrow stand sold dry-cured rations and crisp bread. He pointed to 2 flat parcels of grain-bound trail cake. The vendor, an old woman with no teeth but sharp eyes, weighed his silver with suspicion. "You sure this coin's clean, elf?" Lucien nodded once. "Melted this morning. Not stolen. Melted. Doesn't mean earned." He said nothing. She took the coin. He moved on, slipping through the crowd with practiced care, breath shallow from the noise. The weight of his purchases strained the satchel. Barely anything, and still too much. Then he heard strange music. A single fiddle, off-key, weaving through the market clamor, like thread through cloth. The sound was messy, half-sour notes, wrong bow pressure, but deliberate, intentional, like someone trying to get it wrong and failing beautifully. Lucien slowed. At the foot of a low fountain, on an overturned crate, sat a bearded middle-aged scruffer in a frayed cloak and worn boots. His instrument rested against his chest, like a familiar. His fingers moved like wind, though his beard was dusted with ash and his coat hung in loose folds. He played with his eyes closed, swaying slightly. "You look like your ears can hear more than most," the man said without opening his eyes. Lucien stiffened. "You're not looking at me. Still saw you. That's impossible. So is fire in a circle that doesn't burn you. But here you are." Lucien almost turned away. "Name's Tom." He spoke gently. "Strings and stories. What's yours?" "Luce." "Ah." The bow slowed. "A name with corners." Lucien blinked. "What does that mean?" Tom shrugged. "Most names are soft. Yours isn't. Yours bites a little." The fiddle shifted in tone, a mournful twist in the tune. Lucien didn't recognize the melody. It wasn't Steel City music. It sounded older, wilder, a harmony from beneath leaves. "You're not from here," Tom said. Lucien felt something tighten in his chest. "Neither are you," he replied. Tom grinned, sharp, wolfish, but not unkind. "No, but I play well enough that they feed me. And sometimes I learn what I need to know." Lucien considered him a moment longer. The man was strange, but not threatening. His eyes were too bright for malice. Or maybe they were too tired for it. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. But if you sit," Tom gestured to the edge of the fountain, "you'll find that the world's less sharp when music's involved." Lucien stood a moment. Then, against his better instinct, he sat. He didn't speak again, but he listened. And in that pause between notes, something shifted. Not a spell, not a warning, just the quiet certainty that some meetings, even in a city of 100,000, were meant. The music slowed. Tom plucked one last string, let it ring out, then opened his eyes for the first time. They were pale green, rimmed with silver veins. Not mage's eyes, forest eyes, Lucien thought. Tom gave a dry laugh and leaned his chin against the fiddle's scroll. "You're not the talkative kind, which makes you useful." Lucien raised an eyebrow. Useful how? Tom shrugged, shifting his boots off the crate's edge. Most folk ignore the quiet ones. But you've got the look of someone who'd rather starve than ask a question. Lucien said nothing, because he wasn't wrong. Tom scratched his beard, and then gave him a once-over. "You Sylvan-born, yeah?" Lucien nodded. Tom grinned. "Thought so. You've got the cheekbones and the hair." Lucien's brow furrowed. "What of it? You could make coin off that alone," Tom said, matter of fact. "Fletchers, bowyers, charm knitters, they'd pay handsomely for a length of real elven hair. Stronger than sinew, lighter than wire. Doesn't snap under tension. Some use it for bowstrings, others weave it into the cores of guiding arrows." Lucien's jaw tightened. "You're suggesting I sell parts of myself?" Tom chuckled. "You act like it's your liver. Hair grows back. And yours," he reached out, not touching, just gesturing, "could buy you enough spell paper to stop rationing ink." Lucien shifted in place. The thought made his skin crawl. But the logic held. He hadn't been able to afford a single new focus this month. His shoes were cracking. "It's not shameful," Tom added more gently. "It's practical. Your kind used to trade it for arrowheads and riverstone. It was a right." Lucien stared at him, surprised. "You know elven rights." "I know a lot of things, Lucien. Wind picks up more than just leaves." An hour later, Lucien stood at a Fletcher's stall beneath a canvas awning strung with feathered shafts. The vendor, a square-jawed woman with blue-streaked braids and a scale apron, looked up at him with a raised brow. "You looking for string or offering it?" Lucien pulled his hood down. His hair spilled over his shoulders like fine ebony thread. "Offering?" She leaned forward, inspecting the length and color like a jeweler studying raw quartz. "You wash it in ash soap?" "Birch oil," Lucien replied. "Better." "Sit still." He did. She snipped only what she needed, no more than a braid's worth, but paid him 5 silver pieces on the spot. "Half goes to the bowstring I'll make for a noble's brat," she muttered. "Other half I'll use on a charm set for a patrol group." She dropped the silver into his palm. "If it grows back smooth, come again. Might even give you trade credit for warded arrows." Lucien bowed. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she grinned. "Thank your ancestors for being prettier than sinew." With coins now clinking faintly in his pouch, Lucien stopped briefly for dried fruit, new ink, and a replacement lamp wick. Then he turned his attention to Tom's second suggestion, one Lucien already suspected might help: herb gathering. As a sylvan elf, Lucien could spot growth patterns others missed: tiny curls of shadow moss on shaded stone, frostleaf beneath gutter runoff, even widow root growing against brick. But outside the walls, where the air was richer and the weeds weren't crushed by foot traffic, rarer herbs grew in wild quiet. He stopped at a supply shed near the east gate. A runner's permit cost 2 silver. The guard barely glanced at him. Another elf? Out gathering? Nothing suspicious in that. By late afternoon, Lucien knelt in soft mud just beyond the city's edge. The sun hung low. Golden clover clustered near his knees. A pocket of featherwort tugged gently at his sleeve. He harvested carefully, wrapping each sprig in wax cloth. In just under 2 hours, he'd collected more than a week's worth of trade value, and for the first time in days, his satchel felt full. That evening, he returned to his tower with enough food to last, and the scent of crushed thyme still clinging to his fingers. He poured a small measure of water into his cup, mixed it with dried dates and grain, and sat cross-legged on his cot. His arms no longer trembled. His thoughts no longer scattered with hunger. The day had cost him his hair, his time, his pride. But it had earned him something back. Not comfort, but momentum. The evocation tower cast a long shadow at sundown, its black stone walls veined with iron and soft, alchemical glow. Lucien moved up the spiral steps, careful not to scuff the fresh supplies in his satchel. No one else passed him. Students usually took this hour for meals or rest. He had no time for either. When he reached the 4th-floor conservator, the door was already open. Advisor Redfield stood by the fireless hearth, sorting through crystal files and wax-sealed scrolls. The man was tall and trim, with a grey beard kept in deliberate angles and robes that shimmered slightly between burnt umber and bronze. Evocation marks. "Lucien," Redfield said without looking, "you smell of oil root and silver ash. Sit." Lucien stepped inside, kept his expression neutral, and obeyed. He took the side chair, not the central one meant for full initiates. Redfield finally turned, clasping his hands behind his back. "Your hands are clean," he observed. "Your pack is fuller than usual, and unless I mistake it, your hair is 3 inches shorter on the left side." Lucien said nothing. "Clever, practical, and discreet. That earns my attention." Redfield moved closer, eyeing him as one might assess a newly sharpened dagger. The tower likes such traits, particularly in elves. Lucien stiffened slightly, but Redfield's tone remained cordial. "There are only 100 or so of your kind in this city," the advisor said. "Of those, fewer than 10 reside within the arcane disciplines. Elves are long-lived, attentive, and typically precise. Valuable traits for certain. Long-term interests." Lucien met his gaze now. "You want to retain me?" Redfield gave the faintest of smiles. "I want to offer you structure. I know you work alone. You eat alone. You burn through your energy like powder on flint and refill it with stale fruit. That is admirable, but wasteful." Redfield walked to the tall desk and opened a small ledger. "Here is my proposal. You'll be assigned an auxiliary post as Tower Quarter Scribe. 8 hours per week, 4 on Tithe Day, 4 on Forage Day, aiding with records, spell calibration, and kitchen inventory. During kitchen duty, you'll assist with preparing meal components for ritual use, cataloging consumables, and cleaning implements. In return, your ink, paper, and common reagents will be covered. You will also have second-tier access to the conservator's collection." Lucien's mouth was dry. That level of access was rarely granted to students outside the formal circle. "I accept," he said. After a pause, Redfield nodded once, sharply. "Good. Report each tithe day and forage day after 4th bell. But understand, this is not a gift. It's a tether." Lucien bowed and left the chamber with mixed feelings. The offer was generous and the responsibilities manageable, but the commitment meant less time for sleep and even less for solitude. Still, momentum had been hard won. He wouldn't stop now. If Redfield now watched him, then he would not give the advisor any reason to think the gamble had been misplaced. Lucien practiced his circle inscriptions until his wrist cramped. He whispered spell names beneath his breath until his voice cracked. He timed his caloric burns. He kept count of candle drips. He made no errors. He would not rest. Not yet. Not while the wind still favored him. Weeks passed, marked by sleepless nights and mounting duties. What began as 4 hours on tithe day and forage day had doubled. Lucien now handled not only scribing and kitchen tasks, but also ran errands between towers, assisted novice instructors, and fetched rare ingredients from the market. The demands clawed at his time like roots breaking stone. His body ached from the pace, yet he pressed on, driven by the same fire that had brought him to the Steel City, Gia. Late one forage day, Lucien drifted into the Broken Saddle, a worn tavern near the outer ring. He sat in a corner, sipping thin stew and taking in the room. His eyes caught on an enormous figure hunched by the hearth. The giant had broad shoulders and kind, watchful eyes. He wore patchy wool garments and cradled a battered cup between massive hands. Most patrons gave him a wide berth. Lucien approached cautiously. "May I?" The giant nodded. "Sit. You, elf?" Lucien nodded. "I am Lunk. Real name, Jacob." He paused. "Words. Hard for me." Lucien smiled gently. "Would you prefer Elven?" Jacob's expression lit up with recognition. "In fluid Elven," he replied. "Thank you. It hurts to twist my tongue around the common words." They spoke softly, but the shift in language drew glances. A nearby patron narrowed his eyes. Whispered words passed from table to table. "Best not speak too long in Elven," Lucien said, switching back. "It makes others nervous." Jacob sighed and nodded. Later, outside the tavern, Lucien followed Jacob to a stable behind the farrier's barn. Straw was piled high, and clean blankets laid carefully in one corner. Jacob was allowed to sleep there, but rarely welcomed indoors. "My folk, they don't want me," Jacob said in halting common. "I am too soft. They hit me. Call me Cracked Horn." Lucien placed a hand on the giant's arm. "City's not much better, but it's something." Jacob smiled. "You feel same. Not from here. Not of here." Lucien nodded. He had found a kindred spirit, one more stranger, surviving on the edges of a city that didn't quite know what to do with them. And still, through it all, Gia's name burned in his chest like a brand he could not quench. The days thickened, like soup left too long on the fire. Advisor Redfield's tasks stretched across every hour Lucien could spare, and more. He now slept in fits, often nodding off in side chambers or in the far corners of the library with a book still open on his chest. His robes grew loose from hunger, his fingers ink-stained and shaking. But he would not stop, not while Gia remained beyond his reach. His friendship with Jacob grew in rare, quiet moments, usually at dusk, near the stables, or when the city's market fires had burned down and the scent of charred spice hung in the streets. Jacob had become a gentle anchor in a world Lucien still felt adrift in. They spoke in hushed Elven near the city edge, where none could hear. "You still love her?" Jacob asked one night, watching the moon rise. Lucien nodded. "It's not a love that dims. She was stolen. I aim to return what was taken." Jacob placed a hand over his heart, a slow, deliberate motion. "Then I help." Lucien turned to him. "You'd come with me? Where you go, I go. Unless stable's better," the giant said with a grin. Lucien laughed, more than he had in months. They began to plan. Quietly, between duties, between meals and messages, Lucien pieced together whispers in the library, mentions of void portals, dark realms, and the kinds of magic not taught in any of the 8 towers. He copied sigils and sketched runes in his notebook, hiding them beneath recipes and herb listings. The ritual to track a soul across planes required more than talent. It needed strength, anchors, a link. Jacob, it seemed, had become part of that. One evening, while delivering tinctures to Redfield's study, the advisor looked up with narrowed eyes. "You've been keeping strange company, Lucien." Lucien froze. "I don't mean the giant. I mean the kinds of books you've been borrowing." Lucien swallowed. "I study all forms of magic, sir. Some forms are forbidden for a reason," Redfield said. Then, unexpectedly, leaned forward. "But I understand needing answers. Just keep your feet planted in this world while you chase others. We can't afford to lose what little elven presence we have." Lucien bowed low and left before more could be said. But in his heart, he had already stepped off the edge of the map. "Dearest mother, I trust this letter finds you well and in peace, and that the summer sun has not been too cruel to your gardens. I can still picture you with your hands in the lavender rose, humming to yourself, your silver thimble catching the light. It's a memory I've borrowed often in recent days, one that I store alongside the scent of your warm broth and the creak of the back loom's treadle. Such things return to me unbidden when the days run long and the hours thin themselves to threads. Please don't be alarmed by the silence between this and my last letter. Nothing dire has happened. Only the common kind of tiredness that creeps in when one's mind is asked to stretch farther than it's used to. Steel City remains a wonder, loud and layered and endless. It has a pulse of its own, and I've not yet found its rhythm. But I am still trying. I know how your thoughts must lean toward worry, so let me say plainly, I have food, I have shelter, and I have purpose. Of the 3, purpose is the trickiest to hold on to. Some days it grows wings and hovers just out of reach. But I believe I was meant to be here. Not because I've seen omens or read portents, but because something inside me insists it must be so. The evocation tower remains a place of contradiction, structured chaos, if you'll allow the phrase. One day they ask us to call fire from air, and the next they have us clean the hearths that birthed it. It seems poetic, if not exhausting. I find some solace in that. The days are longer than I ever imagined they could be. My duties have grown, not only in number, but in expectation. In addition to my magical studies and physical practices, I've been asked to take on responsibilities in the kitchens, washing, sorting, helping with the procurement of dried goods and spell-safe spices. Advisor Redfield says it's about grounding our appetites before we feed the arcane. Perhaps, or perhaps, there's no one else willing to scrub cauldrons. I don't complain. The labor gives me time to think, and in some quiet way, I believe it is making me stronger. I remain cautious with the other students. Many are human, bright, eager, and alarmingly quick to master spellwork. They seem to grasp things in weeks that I still wrestle with after months. It's as though time itself favors their kind. It has made me feel behind. Not stupid, no, but slow, like a song being sung in the wrong tempo. I know this isn't the truth of it. Our lives are longer, yes, and our learning perhaps deeper, but it does not stop the sting of comparison. One of the apprentices, Marius, has taken an unkind interest in me. He's perhaps a year older in appearance, full of sharp words and hungers I don't share. Since my appointment as a tower trustee, Redfield's doing, he's made a habit of jabbing at me in passing, calling me Redfield's little flower or worse. I've ignored him, mostly. I know you taught me not to pick battles when the forest offers a path around the thorns. Still, his needling cuts. He is skilled, far more than me. I would respect him if he didn't wield his talent like a whip. 2 weeks passed. One of the newer initiates, Claire, a quiet girl from the southern district, was struck by her own spell. Lightning. A practice gone wrong. She didn't survive. We weren't close, but I knew her laugh. I knew the way she pressed her palms together when nervous. She had just started to find her place. We stood in silence the next morning, a whole row of us, watching the spot where it happened. No memorial, no mourning bell, just ash, as if the world had swallowed her and moved on. The city, the tower, none of it stops for grief. But I suppose you know that better than most. There is one soul I've come to speak with more often, though I'm not sure the others would approve. His name is Jacob. Most in the city call him Lunk, though I've yet to understand why. They say it with the same tone they reserve for stray dogs or broken carts. He's not like them. Not at all. We met outside a tavern near the lower ring, where I sometimes go when I can't sleep. He was seated by the stables, cross-legged and half-covered in a patched wool cloak, chewing on roasted barley and offering it to birds that had no interest. His voice is thick, the common tongue broken and hard for him, but when he spoke to me in Elven, Mother, it was near perfect, like hearing the old songs again. I was stunned silent for nearly a minute. He told me he learned it from an older traveler who passed through his home long ago, one of our kind, exiled or wandering. He didn't say. It's strange to hear our language from someone so unlikely, so far from the forests and groves, but there was something in the way he spoke it. Care, reverence, as if he knew it mattered. I do not speak to anyone else in Elven, not even the tower stewards, not even Redfield. But with Jacob, I can, and I do. You would like him, I think. He is slow to anger, deliberate in movement, and despite his appearance imposing truly, he has the gentleness of a sapling in spring wind. The others don't see it. They see his size, his silence, his sleeping place by the stables. They assume danger in every step he takes. But I've watched him nudge a lost dog to safety, lift crates for old women, and fix a broken wheel with hands that should split logs instead. He told me, in a quieter moment, that his own people drove him out for being soft. He used the Elven word for it, Lumaith. I nearly wept. We share food sometimes, whatever scraps I can carry from the tower kitchens. He doesn't ask, but he never refuses. I told him a little about my work, my studies. He nodded slowly, smiled, like he understood more than he let on. We don't speak often, but when we do, it's worth more than a whole week of chatter from the tower apprentices. Mother, I must confess, even amid all this routine and shadow, it is thoughts of Gia that stir me most deeply. She lingers, like the faintest scent on the breeze, a reminder of what I seek beyond these towers and pages. The weight of her absence is a constant companion, heavier than any tome or task I bear. At times, when the city's din fades to a distant hum, I find myself reaching for her image in dreams. Her laughter, bright and untamed, echoing through the woods we once wandered together. The way her eyes held both fire and calm, the strength in her quiet resolve. I awake with a start, heart pounding, and the cold stone of my chamber pressing against my cheek. I do not tell many here of her. It is a secret I hold close, perhaps too close. Even Jacob senses the fire beneath my calm, though I have yet to explain its source. I fear that to speak her name aloud might make the distance even greater, or worse, invite danger upon us both. Yet it is her name I whisper in the quietest hours, the reason I endure the growing burden, the reason I push myself beyond fatigue, beyond fear, to bring her home. I am careful, Mother, though my heart leaps toward risks I know I should not take. You taught me caution, and I hold that lesson like a shield. But desperation does not always heed shields. I pray you understand my silence on many things. This letter is a fragment of truth, sent across leagues and shadows, with hope it reaches you well. Hold the garden for me, Mother. Tend it with the same hands I remember, and know that no matter the miles, your son carries you in his soul. With all my love, Lucien. The fading light of evening filtered weakly through the narrow windows of the Evocation Tower's study chamber. Lucien sat hunched over a worn scroll, eyes tracing arcane sigils that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. His fingers trembled slightly as he copied a complex sequence of runes, an attempt to unlock the secrets of opening a gateway, a portal between worlds. Despite weeks of study and repeated practice, progress remained frustratingly elusive. Each iteration of the ritual failed to produce more than a flicker of ethereal mist, a whisper of power that slipped away before he could grasp it. The runes on the parchment blurred before his eyes as exhaustion tugged at his focus. Lucien leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The knowledge hidden within these texts promised a path to Gia, perhaps a way to find or reach her beyond the known world, but every attempt seemed to push the solution further away. He whispered to himself, "There must be something I'm missing. Some element beyond the ink and stone." The tower's walls, lined with countless bound pages, seemed to close in around him, sterile and unyielding. For all the wisdom contained within, it felt like a cage. His heart beat faster, a mix of determination and despair. To fail here was to delay his hope, and yet he understood the dangers. Portals were not mere doorways. They were thresholds to chaos. Still, the need to break through was a fire that would not be quenched. The next morning, Lucien found himself summoned to Advisor Redfield's chamber, a space lined with shelves bearing scrolls and bottles that shimmered with strange light. The advisor's sharp gaze met Lucien's weary eyes without preamble. "You've reached a crossroads," Redfield said, voice calm but firm. "No amount of ink and parchment will grant you the awakening you seek. The spell you pursue requires more than study. It requires exposure." Lucien frowned, unsure of what the advisor meant. Redfield continued, "Magic is living. It breathes in the air beyond these walls, in the pulse of the city, in the risk of the unknown. You cannot awaken a gateway with theory alone. You must venture beyond the tower's sanctuary, into the world where magic writhes and changes shape." The words settled heavily in Lucien's mind. He knew the tower was a refuge, a place of order and control. To step beyond was to invite chaos, but also possibility. Redfield leaned forward. "I do not mean you should recklessly chase shadows, but you must experience the world's wildness, its imperfections. Only then can you hope to open a path where none existed." Lucien nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility mingling with a spark of hope. The answer was not solely in the scrolls. The city itself held secrets, and perhaps answers. That evening, Lucien stepped into the lowering sun, hood up, robes belted tight against the growing chill. The streets outside the conservator's tower pulsed with noise. Carts creaking, voices rising, dogs barking in narrow alleys. He walked quickly, hoping Jacob had stayed in one of the familiar haunts near the East Market. Jacob wasn't easy to miss. 10 feet tall, even when slouched, with arms like tree limbs and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. But tonight, the gentle giant was nowhere to be found. Lucien checked the hay-strewn alley behind the staggering pike, where Jacob sometimes napped beside the cooper's sheds. Nothing. He asked a pair of children loitering near a bakery if they'd seen him. They shook their heads. "Too big to hide," Lucien muttered, half to himself, unease beginning to stir, "and too kind to vanish." He visited the Broken Saddle, one of the seedier taverns, but a place Jacob was sometimes tolerated when business was slow. But when Lucien opened the door, the barkeep, a burly man with a busted nose and stained apron, only sneered. "Your stable friend ain't welcome here no more," he said flatly, wiping a glass that was more grime than glass. "Cause no trouble." Didn't matter. People don't drink easy with his kind nearby. Lucien's jaw tightened. When did he leave? The barkeep shrugged. "Couple nights back. Thought he'd wandered off to the Bone Bell, or maybe down the gutters. Big fellow like that. Shouldn't be hard to find." But it was. The streets gave no answer. Jacob's absence had weight to it, like a drumbeat gone silent. Lucien tugged his cloak tighter and turned westward, toward the quieter taverns where rumor ran thicker than ale. If Jacob was missing, there was a reason, and Lucien had no choice but to find it. As Lucien walked deeper into the lower districts, the cobbles gave way to packed dirt and broken stone. Lanterns hung dim and low here, casting rusted halos that seemed to push back against the dark more out of habit than hope. He entered the Bent Coin, a squat, timber-framed tavern nestled between a tanner's yard and a crumbling shrine to the old gods. The barkeep, a narrow-eyed woman with a steel brace on her leg, didn't flinch when Lucien ordered a watered-down mead. She glanced once at his robes, then pointedly looked away. A wizard wasn't rare here, but he was assigned to lower voices and keep lies tidy. Lucien stayed quiet at first, ears open. A pair of tradesmen spoke near the hearth in low tones. Down through the sewer vents, near the boilworks. Swear to the flame, Drev said he saw shapes moving. Not rats, too big. Pa Drev sees shadows, and hears coin clinking in, nah, this time he didn't laugh after. Told me one of the bell ringers went missing last week. Just gone. Lucien leaned closer. A third voice chimed in, old and thick with drink. It's the holes beneath, lad. Always been bad. But they're worse now. Things stir when no one's watching. Lucien sipped, letting the fire in the drink warm his tongue. Later, when he approached the bar to pay, he asked in a low tone, "Has a tall man, very tall, slept near here recently? Kind, doesn't say much. Likely eats root stew and never finishes it." The barkeep frowned, then nodded slowly. 2 nights ago. Slept by the stable wall. Left before sunup. Didn't come back. Seemed scared. Not of us. Of something else. Did he say where he was going? She hesitated. No. But he muttered something. Elven, I think. You'd know better. Lucien nodded. Thank you. As he turned to leave, a barmaid passing with a tray murmured just loud enough for him to hear, "You want to find ghosts, wizard? Look under your feet. That's where they're walking." He stopped briefly, then stepped out into the rising fog. Jacob had gone below, or been taken, and whatever lay beneath the city, Lucien knew, wasn't just shadow and stone anymore. Lucien arrived at Fred's Inn just before twilight, the steel-grey sky pressing low over the alleys like a lid on a simmering pot. The inn stood at a crossroads near the southern commons, its second-story windows glowing with amber light, and the familiar cadence of lute strings and clapping hands drifting from within. Fred's had a reputation. Itinerant bards, wandering minstrels, fire jugglers from the coast, all had graced its low stage at one time or another. It was a place where stories were currency, and strangers rarely left without giving up a verse or two. It was also, Lucien had heard, the last place Jacob was seen. Inside, the crowd swelled around the small raised platform, where a fiddler battled for dominance with a tambourine-wielding halfling. Lucien threaded his way through the din toward the counter, where a barkeep with auburn braids and rolled-up sleeves cleaned mugs with mechanical precision. "You're the mage," she said, not looking up. "Heard you were asking about the tall one." "I am," Lucien replied, lowering his hood. "Jacob. He's gone missing." She finally met his gaze, her expression grim. He was here, always polite, always awkward as a cow in a pottery barn. He'd wait near the back and just listen. Never caused trouble. Lucien nodded. "When did he disappear?" 2 nights ago. Bunch of roustabouts came in. Loud, full of piss and spirit. Said they knew of a job that paid well and needed someone strong and silent. I didn't like the look of them. Tried to get around the bar to stop 'em, but they were gone before I reached the door. Lucien's jaw tightened. Where would they have taken him? She hesitated, then motioned toward the end of the bar. Ask the bard with the knives. Calls himself Whistler. He heard them talking, even if he pretends not to. Lucien followed her gesture, and found Whistler reclining in the shadows near the hearth, a young man in his mid-20s, sleeves rolled high to reveal thin arms inked with constellations and curling vines. Twin knives gleamed at his belt, and one rested on the table before him, its tip idly tracing a circle into the wood. "You've got the look of someone chasing shadows," Whistler said without glancing up. I'm looking for someone taken by trickery. I hear you might know where they went. Whistler looked up, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. They weren't locals, those lads. Didn't smell like miners or sewer hands. More like, he sniffed the air theatrically, mercenaries who don't want to be found. Lucien's voice was firm. Do you know where they went? I might. He tapped the knife's hilt. But I don't trade in coin. Lucien crossed his arms. What? Then Whistler leaned forward, eyes sharp. A favor. Later. Could be a message run. Could be a back turned at the right moment. I call it in when I want. And you don't ask why. Lucien stared at him, weighing the risk. The streets below the city were already treacherous, but to go without any trail or eyes that had seen it firsthand would be foolish. Agreed, Lucien said, but only if your help leads me to him alive. Whistler grinned, extending a hand. Then we have a pact, mage. The smoke of the steelworks lingered here even after the forges slept. The air tasted bitter. Buildings pressed in too close. Windows shuttered like narrowed eyes. Lucien walked with careful steps, boots clicking unnaturally loud in the hush. He tugged his cloak tighter, not from cold, but from the weight in his gut. Whistler was ahead, one hand always near his belt where the throwing knives nested. He didn't talk much now. His shoulders had drawn up. Every turn of the alley watched twice before he stepped through. Lucien finally broke the silence. You said Jakob was helping someone. A widow? With children? Whistler stopped in his tracks, his head tilted. Half disbelief, half pity. You really think that's what this is? Lucien blinked. Why would they lie? Whistler let out a breath through his nose, soft and grim. Because it works. Because someone like Jacob hears stolen bread or hungry child and doesn't stop to see who's really eating. Lucien lowered his gaze, jaw tight. Whistler stepped into a narrow courtyard between squat warehouses. The buildings were silent. Doors were cracked. A broken crate spilled rusted nails and rat-gnawed leather. The only movement came from a tattered bit of cloth caught on a hook. People vanish out here, Whistler muttered. Men, women. Doesn't matter. No one looks. No one cares. He gestured to a corner of the yard where deep drag marks scored the dirt. Large, uneven. A scuffle, maybe. He was here. Carried something. Or someone. Probably thought he was doing good. Whistler's voice was flat. Truth is, he was just moving product. Lucien frowned. Product? Whistler turned to him, and for the first time there was heat behind the bard's voice. You don't know, do you? Elves don't do this kind of thing. You don't break your own for coin. Lucien's throat was dry. We don't. Not like this. Well, Whistler said, voice now hard. Men do. The silence stretched between them, until even the air felt like it listened. They told him a lie wrapped in hope. Whistler continued, made him feel righteous. Then slipped a chain on him before he could blink. Where is he now? Whistler scanned the rooftops. If they moved fast, he's below. Cellars, storage holes, shackled to some cursed cart. Lucien clenched his fists. Then we'll go get him. Whistler didn't answer right away. When he finally did, the words were low. This part of the city doesn't forgive mistakes. So when we go in there, Mage, keep your fire ready, because hope won't save him now. The trail bent toward the smokestack lanes, where the roofs leaned like gossiping drunks, and soot clung to the eaves like fungus. Whistler moved like he belonged, but he flinched when doors opened too fast, and his fingers never left the edge of his tunic. Lucien kept pace behind him, his senses stretched taut. "She calls herself Mother Kin," Whistler said. "Not her name, of course. It's an act. Spun it up when the old gangs died out. Her pitch is sweeter than rote wine, and twice as thick." Lucien narrowed his eyes. "She runs the crew. She runs the lie. Says she finds work for the unwanted. Says she feeds families, helps widows reclaim stolen things. And when the big-hearted show up to help, she breaks them in like oxen." They passed a row of children playing with bones in the gutter. Not animal bones. Whistler stopped at a crooked building, painted in colors long lost to grime. The door hung from a single hinge, yet laughter echoed from within. Wrong laughter, a little too sharp. The kind Lucien had heard once, when two rich apprentices mocked a starving man for begging. "She's in there," Whistler said. "Won't talk to you straight. She'll smile, flatter, maybe offer you a task just to feel your weight. If she smells you're soft, she'll offer rope, and you'll tie it round your own neck." Lucien looked at the door, then back at Whistler. "We need her to talk. I need to know what she's done with Jacob. She won't fear you. You look like spring rain." Whistler smirked. "But maybe I can draw her out." "No." Lucien stepped forward. "Let her see me. Let her lie. I'll know the truth." Whistler muttered something beneath his breath. "You better." Inside, the scent was cloying. Incense burned to cover filth, and the heat of too many bodies pressed in from all corners. A low stage held a half-naked man pretending to be a beast, growling to amuse a crowd of drunk traders. In the back, at a round table surrounded by bruises, sat a woman in dark robes with her hair bound in braids like a nun's crown. She looked up and smiled. "What a lovely visitor. And who brings him to my gate?" Whistler bowed slightly, eyes never leaving the guards. "We heard you had a need for strong hands and honest hearts." Motherkin laughed softly. "You brought me a scholar. How rare." Lucien straightened. "I'm looking for someone. A friend. He came to help you, or so he believed." She sipped from a tin cup. "Many come. Many believe. He's large, kind, and doesn't know this city. You sent him to help a family." "Ah," she interrupted. "So many families in need. It's hard to recall." Lucien took a step forward. "Tell me where he is." Motherkin set her cup down slowly. The laughter around the room died. Even the man on the stage stopped growling. "No one tells me what to do in my house, elf." Lucien's fingers twitched, energy threatening to build, but Whistler touched his wrist. A warning. Motherkin smiled again. "But I do so like it when they ask with manners. Come back tonight, alone. Perhaps we can unearth your friend." Whistler pulled Lucien back toward the door. As they stepped into the smoggy air, Lucien shook with the restraint it took not to burn the entire place to cinders. "She's playing," he growled. "Of course she is," Whistler muttered. "She already sold him. Or she will soon." The tension in the smoky room unraveled fast. Lucien stepped forward when the woman in the swirling braids made a move. Her fingers danced not to music, but to magic. The bruises began to rise, some wielding blades, others emboldened by the comfort of numbers. Whistler didn't hesitate. His daggers flashed from sleeves like angry silver tongues. The first man to rush him went down with a shriek and a crimson mouth, clutching his side. Another stumbled back as Whistler let out a shrill, otherworldly whistle, sharp, focused, not meant for ears but nerves. Several of the minions clutched their heads, stumbling into each other like cattle frightened by thunder. Lucien hesitated, only a moment, but then heat and pressure ignited in his chest. It had always come easiest when the stakes were high. His fingers surged with sparks as he loosed a bolt of flame into the low ceiling above the bar. It caught fast. The rafters were dry, the kindling old. Gasps and panic erupted. Flames began to bloom along the timbers, casting a red glow over frantic faces. "Enough!" Lucien shouted, voice cracking from the smoke and strain. The woman, now furious, tried to summon a glyph of power in the air with her palm, but Lucien focused. He didn't aim for the body, but the mind. Hold. The spell snapped over her like a net. Her eyes widened and then froze mid-blink. Her body locked in place, muscles rigid, breath shallow. She teetered upright like a figure in wax. The fire spread. Lucien stood over her, sweat on his brow, panting. "Tell me where he is," he hissed. "Tell me what you've done with Jacob, or I'll leave you here to burn with your tricks and shadows." No answer. The spell held. The others had either fled or were moaning on the floor. "Lucien," Whistler called, voice tight. "We have seconds, not minutes." He stared at her one more time, disgust welling up in his gut like bile. She would survive, but barely, and only because his teacher had once said, "Mercy is not weakness if it is costly." Lucien turned, robes singed, and ran after Whistler through the back hall and out into the cold alley, the flames licking skyward behind them. Smoke still trailed their heels as they twisted through the maze of side streets. Whistler's sharp eyes scanned every face in the dim alleys. The city breathed different here, faster, anxious, and sharp with rot. "There," Whistler pointed, stepping into Lucien's path. A man ducked behind a cart, greasy and hunched, trying to blend into the grime. Lucien raised a hand, eyes hard. A flick of his fingers and a muttered word. Not even a shout this time, and the man's body went stiff mid-motion. Locked in place, mouth wide in mid-breath, eyes full of panic. His knees trembled against the strain of the spell. They approached. "Breathe, little man," Whistler said, placing a dagger's point under the captive's chin. "Tell us where you were sending the big one." "You know the one?" The spell let the minion speak, barely. His jaw twitched as he fought the paralysis. "Warehouse, near the iron kiln. Trades tonight. No boats. Mule Run." "Who's trading?" Lucien asked. voice low. A crackling aura danced faintly at his fingertips again. What for? The minion swallowed. Not just coin, stuff they took off him. Stuff from others too. A ring, elf make, they said. Lucien's stomach turned cold. The paralysis dropped. The man slumped to the ground, sobbing. Whistler sheathed his blade and motioned to move. They found the place minutes later, an old smithy-turned depot. Just inside, the exchange was happening. A gaunt man handed off a sack of worn coin and a wrapped bundle, bound to a post. Nearby, Jakob looked groggy but unhurt, yet his eyes were wide with betrayal, sweat gleaming on his forehead. Lucien stepped in. The air snapped as a bolt of lightning seared into the rafters. Men shouted, stumbled. Another hand motion. This time fire swirled at his side. The buyers backed away fast. He saw the ring, gleaming amid the other goods. It bore the faint crest of a silver hawk across a crescent moon. His mother's line. That ring should have been with her kin. Had someone stolen from their family? Or worse, Lucien's magic flared uncontrolled. A whip of flame lashed one of the crates, splitting it with a blast. One man shrieked as his sleeve caught fire. The others scattered like rats. Lucien, Whistler shouted, holding his own ground but watching Jakob, whose bindings had been cut in the chaos. The big man looked up, saw Lucien in full wrath, light blazing from his hands, eyes wild. Jakob ran. Jakob, wait! Lucien tried to follow, but Whistler grabbed his arm. Let him go. Lucien turned, fury still boiling. He's scared. He'll get lost, hurt. He's free, Lucien, Whistler said, voice quiet but sure. Let that be enough for tonight. The wind blew the heat away. Lucien looked at the scattered ring, the spilled coin, the burning wood. His hands trembled. His magic had done what was needed, but at what cost? He saw a side of you that's new. Whistler added gently, tomorrow might give you a chance to show him another one. Lucien lowered his hands. The sky was softening into pale amber as the smoke from the warehouse faded behind them. The clang of guards and watchmen grew distant. Steel City yawned awake as Lucien and Whistler stepped from the shadows into the pale blush of morning. They walked in silence for some time, the tension still lingering, like heat from smoldering coals. At the edge of a stone stairwell where the street split toward the inner wards, Whistler paused. He turned to Lucien, pulling a leather pouch from inside his vest. It jingled. He opened it and poured half into Lucien's hand. 20 gold coins, some of them still flecked with soot. Fair's fair, Whistler said, closing the pouch. Was going to ask for more, but after I saw you tossing lightning and fire like it was kindling. Well, 50-50 feels right. Lucien looked at the coins, blinking at the sudden weight. I'm not used to trades like this, he admitted. I don't do it for money. Whistler smirked, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. That's plain to see. But you'll learn that power draws its own debts, whether you ask or not. He tapped the pouch. One day I'll call mine in. Could be a song, Could be a favor, could be something else. Lucien nodded, unsure, and extended his hand. Whistler gripped it with a brief shake, then vanished down a narrow alley, his footsteps already fading into the waking city. Lucien's stomach growled before he'd walked another block. By mid-morning, he'd found a baker's stand by the bridge near the Tower Quarter. A full loaf of honeyed oat, 2 smoked trout wrapped in vine leaves, and a hard cheese cost him 3 gold and earned a suspicious stare from the merchant. He paid anyway, eating half the food as he walked, the rest as he sat by the fountain just outside the evocation tower gates. Birds pecked at crumbs at his feet. By the time the sun had reached its height, Lucien had eaten enough to restore the ache in his limbs and the shake in his fingers. Magic had drained him to the bone. Only food seemed to fill the emptiness. As shadows lengthened and the smell of cooked hearth meal wafted through the quarter, he made his way back inside the tower proper. His robes were still singed at the sleeves. He brushed ash from his tunic and tucked the pouch of coins away, deep within his belt. His mentor awaited him in the arched hall of instruction, seated by a brazier of slow-burning herbs, runes flickering along the floor tiles. The old elf's expression was unreadable as Lucien approached. "Well," the mentor said at last, eyes narrowing, "you return with fire on your boots and gold in your pockets. Let's hope your tale is worth the burn." Lucien exhaled and bowed his head. "It will be," he said quietly, "though I fear I understand people less than I ever have."